The case of a young woman murdered in a locked room. No trace, no evidence, but a call from an unknown number and an unexpected financial secret are the first clues revealing the killer. Who is behind Helen's death? A close friend or a hidden figure among her relationships? Let's follow this investigation to uncover a mystery that will keep you glued to the screen. Part 1. The crime scene. Description of the scene. On a dark night in November 2014, in an old house on the outskirts of Moscow, a serious murder occurred. Helen, the victim, was discovered in a locked room, and the scene left no signs of how the perpetrator could have entered. This old house was located in a secluded area, far from the city center, surrounded by ancient trees, creating a quiet and isolated space from the outside world. The surrounding houses had few residents, making the house even more detached. The next morning, when investigators arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a chilling sight. Helen, a 32-year-old woman known for her serene appearance and somewhat private life, was found lying motionless on an old wooden bed in the room. Everything in the room was in place, showing no signs of disturbance. The door to the room was still securely locked from the inside, with no indication of forced entry. Strangely, the room had no open windows, and there were no signs of intrusion from the outside. As the investigators entered, the air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Helen lay on the bed, her face almost expressionless, with her eyes half closed, as though in a deep sleep. However, the bruises around her neck and body told a different story. These were distinct marks, not from a simple impact, but signs of strangulation, a method of murder both meticulous and terrifying. There was no blood splattered around the room or signs of a struggle. Everything seemed to be in order. The mattress with no strange indentations, and the objects around the room undisturbed. This only added to the confusion surrounding the case. Could the killer have carried out the crime coldly and carefully, leaving no traces? On Helen's bedside table, investigators found a small notebook. It was filled with fragmented notes, hastily written, appearing almost as incomplete thoughts. Some sentences seemed to only make sense to the writer, adding to the confusion for the reader. The investigators immediately recognized that this notebook could be a key to unlocking what had happened. Next to the notebook, a mobile phone was found, its SIM card removed and placed in a drawer in the nightstand. This further raised suspicions of a deliberate cover-up, with the killer seemingly trying to erase all contact traces from the victim. As the investigators gathered evidence from the scene, they found another odd item, a small key, whose purpose was unclear, but it didn't seem to belong to anything in Helen's room. This key was found beneath her pillow, near where she had been lying. The more they observed, the more questions arose. How could the killer have entered the room without leaving any trace? Why was the phone's SIM card removed and hidden? Were the notes in the notebook a last-minute message from Helen, or simply chaotic thoughts before she met her death? And what about the strange key? What did it mean? Could it be an important clue the investigators had to explore further? The crime scene, with its strange and inexplicable details, left the investigators at a standstill. No witnesses, no clear evidence of the perpetrator. Everything appeared to have been staged carefully. It seemed the killer had planned every step, leaving only vague clues. The investigators were forced to link the clues together to continue their search. But the case was becoming increasingly complex. This was just the beginning of a tense investigation. As the questions mounted, but the answers remained a mystery. Everyone was waiting for the next clue, the piece of evidence that might bring them closer to the truth. Part 2. The identity of the victim and the investigation process. Immediately after arriving at the scene, the first task for the investigators was to identify the victim. Helen Smith, a 32-year-old woman, had been living alone in this house. She had moved to Moscow from a small town a few years ago in search of a new life. According to initial information from her neighbors, Helen was a private person, rarely socializing, and never disclosed much about her personal life. She lived independently, and very few people knew about her work or relationships. This made the case even more mysterious and puzzling. One of Helen's closest neighbors, Mrs. Olga, mentioned that Helen rarely interacted with anyone, but about a week before the murder, she had seen a man visiting her. However, when Mrs. Olga tried to ask about this man, Helen just briefly mentioned that he was an old friend. There was nothing unusual, and this man had no specific name or address. making any information about him more obscure. By checking with her acquaintances, the police also learned that Helen worked at a software company as a programmer. However, her colleagues knew little about her personal life. They said she was hardworking, kept to herself, and was always focused on her work. No one knew if she had any romantic relationships. This sparse information only fueled the investigators' suspicions about Helen's isolated life. Had she made an enemy from hidden relationships? Meanwhile, investigators continued collecting evidence from the scene and worked with forensic experts to determine the cause of Helen's death. The preliminary results showed that she had died from asphyxiation, with clear signs of strangulation. There were no indications of any other weapons, and no wounds on her body except for the bruises. This suggested that the killer had carried out the act with great care, leaving no obvious traces. Furthermore, the lack of blood in the room reinforced the possibility that she had died shortly after the attack, making it difficult for the investigators to pinpoint the exact time of the murder. One important clue discovered during the investigation was the notebook Helen left behind. Its notes, although incomplete, contained fragments of Helen's thoughts in the days leading up to her death. These hastily written, unclear lines painted a picture of a woman struggling with something she could not share. This made the investigators think that Helen might have been facing some kind of threat recently, but they could not yet confirm it. Interviews with friends, co-workers, and neighbors provided no further useful information. Everyone described Helen as quiet, but no one could explain why she had been brutally murdered. One big question remained. Had someone been stalking her for a long time and planned to kill her? In the meantime, investigators decided to expand their search and track down data from Helen's mobile phone. After conducting checks, they discovered that, just before her death, she had received a long call around 10 p.m., about an hour before she was found dead. However, strangely, this call was not recorded in her call history, and there was no information about the caller. This further increased suspicion about who could be involved in the case. With unclear and ambiguous data, the case became more complex. Investigators decided to work with criminal behavior analysts to identify the perpetrator's motive. Could this be a case involving personal feelings, or the result of a hidden relationship? All these questions still awaited answers. Part 3. The suspects and important clues. With the victim's identity established, the investigators' next task was to identify potential suspects. However, as in all complex murder cases, the traces and relationships surrounding Helen were not easy to uncover. Most of those who knew her had little information to offer, which forced investigators to broaden their search for possible suspects. One of the first suspects was Andre, a man whose name appeared in Helen's phone contacts. Andre was a former colleague of hers. They had worked together at a software company before Helen switched to her current job. According to those around her, they had been close in the past, but recently, their relationship had become strained. Helen didn't want to talk about Andre, but when they met, she seemed to avoid mentioning him. A deeper investigation into Andre's background revealed that he had recently gone through a tumultuous breakup with his girlfriend and showed signs of depression. In recent months, he had been seen frequently around Helen's neighborhood, even being spotted by neighbors standing in front of her house at night. However, there was no concrete evidence that Andre had actually visited Helen the night of the murder. His contact information was not found on the victim's phone, and according to Helen's friends, she had been avoiding contact with him in recent weeks. However, an interesting clue emerged when investigators discovered that Helen had received a long call around 10 p.m., just before she was found dead. This call, although missing from Helen's call history, appeared in a network log showing that a strange number had called her. When they checked the number, investigators found it belonged to Andre. When called in for questioning, Andre seemed confused and could not explain the call. He claimed not to remember calling Helen that night, but investigators noticed inconsistencies in his statements. His reaction made them suspect he might be involved, but there was no conclusive evidence to charge him. The lack of Andre's fingerprints at the crime scene also made the suspicion insufficient to build a case. Another key clue emerged when investigators continued examining data from Helen's mobile phone. Technology experts discovered that before her death, Helen had deleted several important messages. Some of these messages were related to a financial transaction she was dealing with, and it seemed she owed a large sum of money. These messages suggested that Helen had been in contact with a man named Ivan, a former friend she rarely mentioned. According to investigators, Ivan was a venture capitalist who had previously assisted Helen in technology projects. However, their relationship was not purely professional. When investigators looked into Ivan, they discovered that, aside from providing financial assistance, he also helped Helen start a tech business. But this relationship had soured over time, and there were indications of a financial dispute between them. Perhaps this was the key to understanding why Helen had been killed. Part 4. The hidden financial secrets and the connection to the killer. The investigators, now focusing on the financial clues that had emerged, were faced with a new and unsettling discovery. Helen's financial situation, previously thought to be stable, had more layers than anyone had realized. The messages on her phone pointed to an unresolved financial conflict between her and a man named Ivan, whom she had been in business with. The nature of their dispute hinted at a darker undertone, one that might have led to violence. The financial debt. The more they dug into Helen's financial dealings, the more troubling the picture became. According to the records they uncovered, Helen had been living beyond her means for some time. She had made significant investments into tech ventures, some successful, others less so. But what truly raised suspicion was the large sum of money she owed to Ivan. The figures revealed that she had taken out a substantial loan from him, one that she could not repay due to her business's poor performance. What started as a professional relationship had grown tense as Helen's debts mounted. The final message that had been deleted from her phone contained an ultimatum from Ivan, demanding that Helen settle the debt or face severe consequences. It was clear that the once friendly relationship had soured into something far more dangerous. Helen's family, who had been contacted by investigators, confirmed that she had been reluctant to discuss her finances, keeping the details of her debt a secret even from them. They believed that she had been trying to resolve the situation privately, perhaps out of fear of the consequences. However, the family also revealed that Helen had become more withdrawn in the weeks leading up to her death. She no longer attended family gatherings, and when asked about her work or personal life, she became visibly anxious. It was as though she knew something bad was coming but felt powerless to stop it. The motive and the killer's plan, as the investigators pieced together the financial details. The motive for the murder began to come into sharper focus. The idea that the crime was related to money seemed more and more likely. Helen had not been able to repay the debt to Ivan, and the financial pressure had built to an unbearable point. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that was even more chilling: the manner in which she was killed. Strangulation, a method often associated with crimes of passion, seemed to indicate that the killer knew the victim personally and may have been acting out of anger or desperation. The absence of any signs of forced entry suggested that Helen had let the killer into her home willingly, or perhaps she had no idea that her life was in immediate danger. The small key found beneath her pillow, which initially seemed like an insignificant detail, began to make sense. It appeared to be a key to a safe deposit box, one that might have contained documents or valuables related to Helen's financial dealings. This discovery added another layer to the mystery. Could the killer have known about the box and hoped to retrieve something from it? The final breakthrough. With the mounting evidence against Ivan, the investigators decided to confront him. When they brought him in for questioning, Ivan denied having any involvement in Helen's murder, claiming that the relationship had ended amicably. Despite the financial dispute, however, his story began to unravel under further scrutiny. Investigators learned that Ivan had been in financial trouble of his own, and he had been looking for ways to cover his losses. The loan he had given Helen was not simply an act of kindness but a calculated move to gain leverage over her. In fact, Ivan had been using the debt to manipulate her into doing business deals that were unfavorable to her. The deeper the investigators dug, the more they uncovered Ivan's pattern of using financial coercion to control others. The breakthrough came when a forensic expert matched Ivan's fingerprints to those found on Helen's phone, which he had apparently tampered with shortly after the murder. The phone's SIM card, which had been hidden in a drawer, was traced back to Ivan's number. But even more damning was the discovery that Ivan had been in the area on the night of the murder. Several security cameras near the house had captured a man matching his description walking near Helen's home around the time of the crime. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The arrest, With this new evidence, the investigators arrested Ivan on suspicion of murder. During his interrogation, he finally broke down and confessed to the crime. He admitted that he had been angry when Helen failed to repay the loan. But his initial intentions were not to kill her. He had planned to intimidate her into giving up the key to her safe deposit box, hoping to retrieve documents that would benefit him financially. However, when Helen resisted, their confrontation escalated. In a fit of rage, Ivan strangled her, carefully staging the scene to make it appear as though no one had entered the room. Ivan's confession shocked those who knew Helen and him. While the motive seemed clear, the cold calculation behind the murder was even more disturbing. Ivan's willingness to kill over money, and to destroy someone he once considered a business partner, revealed the true depths of his greed and lack of empathy. Conclusion: the murder of Helen Smith was a tragic reminder of how hidden financial pressures, coupled with manipulative relationships, can lead to devastating consequences. What appeared to be a random act of violence was, in reality, the culmination of years of financial strain, hidden debts, and personal betrayal. In the end, it was not just Helen's financial secrets that led to her death, but the lethal combination of greed, anger, and control exercised by someone who had once been close to her. The investigation closed with Ivan's arrest and the discovery of more financial documents linking him to a series of fraudulent activities. Helen's death, though tragic, had unraveled a web of deceit and manipulation, exposing the lengths to which some would go for money and power. The case served as a sobering reminder that the most dangerous threats often come from those we trust the most. The story of Helen Smith's death is not only a personal tragedy but also a warning about the unforeseen consequences of relationships influenced by money and manipulation. Through this case, we realize that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger, but someone we trust the most. Hidden financial secrets, unspoken conflicts, and unclear relationships can lead to decisions so terrible that we could never have imagined them. Do you believe that money can truly change a person this much? Or is it the psychological factors and greed that pushed Ivan to commit such a heinous act? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This story surely makes us reflect on the relationships in our own lives. If you found this story interesting and want to hear about more surprising cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future videos. Every like and subscription is the motivation for us to continue creating exciting and meaningful content. Thank you for watching. Wishing you a peaceful day and always keeping clarity and calmness in your heart. See you in the next video.